Welcome back to the afternoon session, inshallah. While we wait for people to come back into the room, I might rehash what we did at the end of the morning session, where we talked about the object of love, the process of love, the movement of love, and the vector of love. And we said that always the object of love is something beautiful whose acquisition completes or perfects us. Right? And we gave examples through the different types of love that we looked at, the divine love and cosmic love. But always the object of love is the beautiful. And we saw also that love is a process, a relationship. It's a movement that draws us or pulls us to beauty, and in the presence of it, usually something else is produced. So the final outcome isn't just the love itself. The acquisition of the love produces a third thing. So for example, obviously in the relationship of love between two individuals, it produces a union between them, and that union may be translated into a child or not. But even if there's no child, there still is a third thing, which is that you have a union between the two. A union is a third thing. And in every context you look at love, you see that love is produced in the presence of beauty that creates something else. Right? And that's the logic of creation itself. We saw how with the example of divine love, especially the divine love for the perfections and beauties of his divine names produces or grants these things, their creation, their existence, and they come into this world. And we saw also that one thing I didn't mention enough, but I should iterate here, because ultimately the end point of every act of love, whether we're aware of it or not, is the source of all love. Because we're drawn to beauty, and the ultimate beauty is the divine beauty, you can never satisfy the desire of love. At least not with any worldly thing. Right? Ultimately, no worldly object, no woman, no man, no tree, no plant, no object of beauty can ever satisfy. So love is something that you're constantly pursuing until you land at the ultimate beloved, and even there's a beginning and no end. Right? So that's important to bear in mind. It's not something you can ever fully satisfy. Now, sometimes what tends to happen, and we'll come to this in a minute, is what happens when you try to satisfy it in the wrong places. We'll get to that in a minute. So the process of love is that. The vector of love is usually out of ourselves towards an other. Right? Love points outward, going out of oneself towards another, from ego to egoless, from self to other. Now the movement of love, or love as a vehicle, carries us beyond ourselves, but where? Either a movement upwards, back to our source, the divine, or outwards towards the world and others. Okay? And you can imagine here that an outward movement towards others can also be a means of moving upwards, right? Or, in its lowest form, it moves us down. It moves us down. And then we looked at cosmic love, that second category of love or type of love, and we saw how, in the same way that love is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love for the beauty of his names, and the love for the latent possibilities or the things that could exist but don't exist, the love that he gives, the love for them and their beauty, and he grants them existence and they come into being, in the same way that love is the thing that brings us into existence, now reciprocally, our love, right, draws us back to God. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love for us, first, his initial love for us as things that don't yet exist, and then his love for us as things that exist, and he gives us existence and he grants us guidance and perfections and he sends us prophets, etc., etc. That love has to be met with a reciprocal relationship of our love for him. يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ. There's always a reciprocal. However, our love for him can never match his love for us. Okay? Our love for him can never match his love for us. And therefore, everything in creation is on a path of moving back to or constantly recollecting God. We're the only creatures who seem to be oblivious or forgetful, and we're kind of sometimes oblivious of the fact that we can be oblivious, which is the worst of the worst. You can be oblivious but aware that you can be oblivious. But the fact that you're oblivious or unaware that you can be unaware, is the worst, right? Like Socrates, when he was put to trial, he told his accusant, he said to him, the judge tells him, that the difference between you and me is that you don't know that you don't know, but I know that I don't know. Right? You don't know that you don't know. The worst place to be. Okay, all right. So cosmic love then is the movement of all of creation, and its movement towards him. Everything is pointing, is moving, is worshipping. So when we put our heads on the prayer mat towards the Qibla, we're putting ourselves on a vector of love towards God. Yeah. Now everything in creation is already on that prayer mat all the time. Yeah. And it can never leave the kind of loving relationship it already has, right? By nature, it has to do that. But we, on the other hand, can move up and down. Okay, now we come to the 4 categories of human love. So right now I'm going to be talking about only the categories of human love, and I'm going to start from the bottom up. I'm not going to go from the top down. I'm going to start with the elemental. Just before we move on, have you found these? Did you find these, let's say, mental tools useful when listening to the previous talks, or did you see no connection whatsoever? More or less, maybe. Okay, all right. Type. Okay, type. So, what's the lowest form there? And we might want to put a line here, because technically, we call it elemental love, but it's not really love. Why? It's elemental love, al-hub al-unsuri. It is physical love, physical desire, instinct. Okay? It's the lowest form of love, and many scholars don't even use the word love for it. They may call it hawa or something else, right? But nonetheless, we can analogously call it love, right? It is a movement towards something else, but the problem is it's a purely physical, instinctive movement. Let's break that down a little bit. Meaning what exactly? So let's take the example of human love. So we're talking about human love, right? Let's try to visualize this in terms of a relationship. What kind of attraction to another that is purely physical, carnal, desire, instinct? I mean, what's another word or expression for the kind of purely physical, carnal attraction to another person?
Lust. Lust.
No. Whoa. Lust, yes. Lust, yeah. Lust, right? Lust, purely sexual attraction, purely physical. Where's it coming from? An instinct and a drive that's beyond my control, that's purely biological. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, if it's within certain kind of limits and guidelines, right? But unhinged, if we have it and we satisfy it, which is what tends to happen usually on Friday night and Saturday nights in Western cultures, right? What is it?
Superficial.
Another name for it is, Imam al-Ghazali would say, it's animalistic, right? Let's try to break it down in terms of what's the object of love here? You got to raise your voice. I can't. You're whispering.
Your desire? Like beauty, but beauty, but in its superficial.
Yeah, you can say it's purely. Yeah, I mean, obviously you have to be attracted, right? So it's a purely physical form of beauty. Yeah. That's and how does it complete me if I satisfy it?
Like the lust is gone.
The lust is gone, right? Like you have this lust and this desire and you pursue the object, it stops it. The problem though is, exactly, you can never satisfy it. You can never satisfy it, right? And the problem is, unless you entertain the possibility of a different type of attractive power, and you subsist at this level of, what kind of nafs is this? Nafs al-amara. Amara, right? It's the level of the nafs that's pure, get, you know? Like just satisfy. And that nafs al-lawama, outside any clear or strong moral boundaries, is a form of, it's a prison. It's a prison. You're enslaved to your lower instincts. You're compelled by them. They have you. You don't have them. At the level of elemental desire and lust, you are had by your instinct. You don't have an instinct. The lust has you. You don't have it. Right? So that's why Imam al-Ghazali calls it bestial, but even worse, because an animal is an animal. It doesn't know how to be otherwise. Right? But if you become an animal, then you've taken a step down that ontological ladder, right? And you're less than human, right? An animal is perfect being an animal. A human being is imperfect being an animal because we're more than animals, right? So it's a less than perfect level of love, and it existing purely at this level drags you down. Now, when we move up to the other levels don't exclude the elemental. Each level above includes the lower one, but refined, right? So in a marriage, you have a relationship that has an elemental aspect to it. Otherwise, right? Not a very satisfying marriage, right? There's an elemental aspect, but it's part of something higher, right? So a purely elemental existence or elemental type of love, we don't call it love, we call it lust, we call it hawa, we call it desire, we call it instinct, we call it physical satisfaction, whatever it is. So its object is a type of beauty in the other, but it's purely physical. And why it's dangerous, because, especially for men, less so women, but for men, because there were all sorts of physical beauty, but the beauty of the human form is the most attractive to human beings, right? And scholars even go further and say the beauty of the female form is the most perfect, right? So there's an element of danger there. So what's the vector of love here?
It's towards the satisfaction of the desire.
Yeah, so where's it going?
The trying to satisfy your own desires.
Exactly. So
Yourself.
exactly. So it's towards the self. It's the wrong direction, right? Because it may feel like it's for the other, but it's towards the other, but it's not for the other, right? It's for the mere satisfaction of carnal lust and desire. And of course, the movement of love here is what? As a vehicle, where does it carry you to? Usually, if indulged in long enough, it's bringing you down and down and down, right? Down the ladder of that, we have a ladder towards God, and there's a ladder towards the subterranean realms of that murky, subconscious, bestial, primal existence, right? We're supposed to be moving upwards all the time. Otherwise, the elevator is broken, and it's not working, right? So the movement, it carries you downwards, right? Not towards more perfection, not towards أحسن تقويم وخلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين. Actually, it's أسفل سافلين. It's a downward spiral. Okay, all right. طيب. Questions so far?
Is it possible with this theory that the process of love, if it is towards the right object, it's going to create something new, like what you said, children?
Yeah. So we're going to see that in the next one. Yeah.
But if it's the wrong object, then it actually destroys something.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Actually, we didn't discuss the process here. You're right. So we talked about the elemental love. What's the process here? What's being generated from this?
I was positing that it's actually destroying something. Similar with drugs, right? People want to satisfy themselves, end up destroying themselves. Whereas all of the good objects, Allah being the best, it does create something.
Yeah. So out of this then process, what emerges is something destructive. Right? Destruction, exactly. Thanks for, I don't know why we skipped over that, yeah. So that, let's call it elemental love is narcissistic, right? It's centered around, it's egotistical. It's about me, my desires, me. Me at the lowest possible level. And that can only produce in the presence of the attraction to someone beautiful, all sorts of different pathologies and ills and destructions, right? So not everything that comes out of this process, and you find it also in, and only human beings are capable of destruction, by the way. You say, okay, a scientist produces an atom bomb, and all hell breaks loose, right? Let's say. So it's a creative process, yes, but what does it lead to? Right? So there are dawabit, there are guidelines and parameters for doing it right, and ignoring them, you do it wrong. Because we human beings, unlike any other creature in creation, we're capable of creating very good things, and we're capable of creating very, very bad things. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this gift. We can create like Him, not in an identical way, but we're the only creatures to whom you can apply the word create. Right? But He creates with a capital C, we create with a small c. Right? But we can get it wrong, or we can get it right. Okay, all right. So moving beyond elemental love, that kind of moves us horizontally or usually down. We have a step above that is natural love, al-hubb al-tabi'i. Right? Now, let's define this a little bit more. This is a love where the lover demands, not obviously demands, and he says it, right? But that this type of lover demands the fulfillment of their requirements and needs from the beloved, regardless of whether the needs or the pleasures or displeasures of the beloved are taken into account or not, right? So there's a complete disregard for the needs or of the other, right? So there is a reaching out towards the other, and there is an attempt to satisfy more than the purely carnal desires of the person, right? So you may satisfy emotional desires of your own, You may satisfy existential needs that you have, but you're doing it without consideration for the needs of the other. It incorporates elemental love because there is a carnal element to it, right? However, it's meeting more than just carnal desires, right? So if we were to talk about here, what's the object of love here? What would you say? And natural love and the next one, psychological love, is where most people are at. Right? They're in between these two states. So it's a love, the lover demands the fulfillment of his requirements and needs from the beloved, regardless if these needs please or displease the beloved.
Things need like you, object of love is you.
Sorry?
Object of love is yourself. Is that right?
No, so what's the object of love here?
It's yourself.
Well, ultimately, I mean, what are you pursuing? You're not pursuing, well, okay, you can say, yeah, you can say, okay, you could, you can say that, okay, you're pursuing, and like in the previous instance, you're drawn to the other person because of some kind of beauty in them, obviously. But like in the previous case with the elemental love, there may be an element where you're projecting all your egotistical needs on the other. Before it was purely physical, now it's also emotional and something else, right? So there's an element of that, that's correct, right? But fundamentally, there's an attraction to the other person, otherwise you wouldn't be, right? So that's the real object of love there, even though part of the object you're pursuing is partly yourself, right? So the vector of love then is what? If you were to draw an arrow, we would say, there's an element of going out. There's also an element of, I'm still to a certain extent, right? So if in the elemental love, the arrow was pointing this way, maybe someone can, or maybe I'll do that. Where's my pen? So in the first instance here, we can say, okay, if we were to write self and other, in the first instance, there's an arrow that's always going like this, right? It's back to the self. In the second instance, there's an arrow going out, but also there's an arrow looping back in, right? If you were to illustrate it that way. So here, once again, natural love is that attraction to the beauty of the other, right? There is a beauty that you're drawn to. There is a beloved that you're drawn to. And in addition to the carnal physical, there's also the emotional, the affective, etc., etc. But the problem there is, because it's regardless if the needs if this pleases or displeases the beloved, right? It's self-centered in a way, and the outcome is what? The process produces what? How many of these relationships have you seen?
Say like abuse. Like abuse.
It could lead to abuse, yeah. It could lead to abuse where your needs are being satisfied physically and emotionally, but the others are not. And so the outcome could be it could be a relationship, but that's a beast or a monster of a relationship, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like that, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. But it could be that because in the process of pursuing and fulfilling your requirements, you might be fulfilling also their requirements. They may be projecting the same on you, right? But often there's a tension because there's a discrepancy because what you're trying to achieve may displease them, and what they're trying to achieve is displeasing them, right? So we're not talking about one person in this thing, you know. It could be both people. So you wanted to say something?
I was going to say, is it still a little bit narcissistic?
It is. There is an element of that. Yeah. There is an element of that. And the arrow of this would be what? Up, down, where usually? It could be down, it could be horizontal, right? It's not really a mature type of relationship. A lot of marriages last a very long time based on this only. They get into all sorts of difficult waters, but so the vector here is partly outward, partly inward. Now it depends on the other person in the relationship or where their vectors are, right? But the movement you can say is either horizontal or it goes down or and whatnot. Okay.
So what's the object of it?
The object is the main object, the primary, is the beloved because you're attracted, you're drawn to them. But the secondary one is your projected self, right? Because you're seeking the fulfillment of your own requirements, even if it displeases them, then you're the center of focus here. Okay? So it can be that's why the arrow partly points back and outward, right? And this is a very difficult one to be in because a lot of people tend to project part of themselves on the other. It's a cause of so many issues, right? You've heard of the case of the young girl who has father issues and project that onto a person, and she gets into a very destructive relationship, not realizing that she's projecting, right? Or she's seeing in the other person basically part of herself that hasn't gone properly addressed or fulfilled. It's projected onto another male, and you get all sorts of. Why? Because maybe she's not seeing the person for who he is or what he is, but part of it is my issues are being projected onto this person, right? Or divorcees, right? Or people who project the behavioral pattern of an ex onto a current partner. I mean, forget about it. That's a recipe for disaster and happens a lot, right? Because you find a lot of people saying to their partner, hang on a minute, that's not what I meant by what I said, or that's not, no. The sequence of events and actions that you're doing or saying she interprets or he interprets it in a certain light based on a certain pattern of behavior that they had internalized from a previous partner. So they're projecting also. So they're drawn to the other person, obviously, right? And they're trying to seek fulfillment of their own needs, but they're not seeing the needs of the other person in this instance, right? And things get complicated, right? So there's a lot of these issues that have come up in relationships, and that make the relationship quite, which is why a lot of the prophetic wisdom around relationship is about nipping it in the bud. It's about preventative, right? Because if you were to educate every person to the level of such advanced self-consciousness to have a functioning relationship, that's going to take decades, right? But people need to survive in their relationships now, right? So do you do preventative medicine, or do you do medicine that comes after the prophetic medicine is preventative? Give an example. Sorry, just 1 second. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us husn al-zan, right? Give your brother and sister 70 reasons and excuses before you impute a negative intention to them. You know how many social problems that solves? 1,000,001. Preventative, right? If you don't do that, then you're constantly questioning and engaging in ta'wil and tafsir, and this is what they meant, and this is what they said, and this is what they actually meant, and this meant this, and this gesture meant that, and when they did this with their shirt, this meant this, and you get into an endless, right? It's like if you just spent your intellectual energy on something else, it'd be much more productive, right? Nope, husn How many problems of backbiting and social ills and problems does it solve? A lot, right? But we tend today not to take the prophetic medicine, which is preventative. We tend to take the medicine that deals with the problems. Try to avoid falling in the problem in the first place. It's better than having all these pathologies and saying, where does the Prophet ﷺ teach us how to solve these pathologies? The Prophet taught you how to avoid them, right? The prophets and the awliya and the scholars don't always teach you how to solve them afterwards, because that's never ending. And a lot of modern psychological advice is based on post, not prior, not pre, right? Unless you produce the perfect human being with a perfect amount of knowledge, with a perfect consciousness, you can't solve things after. You know what I mean? The best medicine is the preventative medicine, right? Otherwise, you'll end up in hospital trying to solve that gut problem in a million different ways. You should have eaten healthy, and otherwise you would have avoided 1,000 diseases, right? That's what a lot of traditional medicine is about. Okay, all right. So, Imran, yes.
Oh yeah, my question was, why is it called natural love? Like, is that sort of the default state is to fulfill your need without caring about them? Is that like the default? Why is it called natural?
Oh, why the term natural?
Yeah, why is it called natural?
Oh, because it's at the, so, okay, very good question. Thanks for asking that. So, let me use a different color. Purple, okay. طيب. If you go from here to here, lower to the higher, here, you're moving up in your own level of the soul, right? The most basic constituents of your body, the elemental things that you're made of, pure body instinct drive, right? So each level is higher in your own consciousness. The natural is linked to bodily and emotional. We're going to get to the psychological one. The spiritual is when you're centered now in the highest point of your soul, right? So each one of these is a higher degree, a higher center of gravity, right? Because you can have your center of gravity below the waist, or higher heart, etc., right? So that's what's meant by the natural is about the bodily / emotional, but at the most basic level, right? At the most basic level. Now, the hubb al-nafsani, the psychological level, is a step higher. It's a type of love where the lover demands the fulfillment of his and the beloved's requirements and needs. Right? So this is a degree of love where you're fulfilling your needs and the needs of the beloved. So if we were to analyze this using these four, I don't know what to call these. The object of love is what?
The relationship.
The beloved, yeah, the beloved. But let's break it down. I mean, in every instant it is the beloved, but it's the beloved in their physical beauty, but also in their, let's say, emotional and psychological, right? It's not just because you're fulfilling their needs. And so the vector movement is what? What's the vector of movement here?
Sorry.
It's a what? I can't hear that.
Diagonal.
Oh, I mean, okay. No, I mean, we mean, is it, okay, it's outward, yeah, okay. It's outward, yeah. There's no sense of fulfilling my needs, the other's fulfilling my needs. So in both instances, if there's a psychological love on both sides, right, it's not centered on any secondary personal need necessarily, at least not in a selfish way. And so what's the process of love? What does it produce?
Beautiful relationship. Beautiful relationship.
beautiful relationship. Let's find the Quranic word for that. I mean, what is the word Quran? Allafa, ulfa, sakina. Yeah? These terms that the Quran uses about marriage, the outcome, the baby that's produced, essentially, before the actual physical baby comes, is a peaceful household, right? Because two individuals, the relationship they have together transcends the individual. The whole is greater than the part. There's always, when two things get together, there's a whole that's greater than the parts, right? There's always a third thing that's created and produced. And in this instance, there's a certain degree of egolessness. There's a centering of self in the other to a certain extent, right? There's an attraction to the beauty of the other person, both at the physical, basic, emotional, and also more than that, at the psychological level of meeting each other's psychological needs, existential needs, etc. Right? The psychological is above the natural because the natural is bound to the body. The psychological is your internal life of ideas, thoughts, fears, hopes, emotional security, etc., etc. Right? And so, in this instance, what is the movement of love? Not yet. It's diagonal, right? In the sense that this becomes the conduit for something higher, right? That's why marriage is half your deen. Granted that you're not in it only at the level of elemental love, then it's the end of your deen. Right? It's not half your deen, it's not a part of your deen at all. Well, a very minimal part, right? This is the level that we're supposed to be at in terms of our degree of love, right? And here, in this instance, we love each other for the sake of Allah, for the sake of etc., etc., right? But in this instance of love, it's not yet the case that I love the beloved because I see the divine being in the beloved. I love the other person because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I love Allah, and Allah tells me and teaches me this, and the Prophet etc., right? But what's the highest? So if we were to draw this, we'd say this movement, the movement of is like diagonal, right? In the case of spirit, sorry, I should have drawn it the other way. Elemental is here, and anyway, you get it, right? It's the wrong order. What's spiritual love? Al-Hubb al-Ruhani, which is the highest type of love. Love in which the lover seeks to gratify the beloved in such a way that leaves no will or requirement sought from the lover other than the gratification of the beloved completely. Right? The beloved here is always now, some scholars divide the spiritual love into two categories, or they may add above spiritual love another category, right? But I'm just going to stick to one. So love in which the lover seeks to gratify the beloved in such a way that leaves no will or requirement sought from the lover other than the gratification of the beloved, right? That's the love of Majnun Layla. That's the love that you find in classical Arabic poetry. Sometimes it leads people to all sorts of process of self-destruction in the process, right? Now, scholars tell us that beyond this spiritual love, there's a degree of, higher degrees of love, but they say that the highest form of spiritual love is when in the physical beloved, you see the metaphysical beloved. And those are what you're truly seeking to satisfy. Right? Some scholars say this type of love, where you satisfy the needs of the beloved at all costs, even at the expense of your own, this shouldn't be in a human-human relationship. But the reason why I'm mentioning it here as a human form of love is because it does happen in human relationships, right? You often find people are smitten to such a point where at the level of their own self-sacrifice, they're always after. Now, I'm not talking about the pathological form of this. There's a pathological form of this where a woman or a man may be in an abusive relationship and they're seeking the satisfaction of the other at the expense of their own because of fear, or because they're of Stockholm syndrome. Right? They're stuck in a victim relationship and they're forgotten that they're victims in a prison. Right? I'm talking about the positive manifestation of spiritual love, like Majnun Layla, right? Where, or you sometimes find this in some forms of Western literature and in a very crass form in some novels and Hollywood movies, but I don't want to talk about those because they get it all wrong, right? But where the person, because they love the other person so much, they'd rather see them, they'd rather break up with them because they believe that it's better, it's greater for the happiness of the other person than keep them for themselves, right? But in Islamic tradition, we're taught that a certain degree of this is healthy in a human-human relationship, where sometimes and especially, for example, a lot of parental love for children is of this category, right? Where the needs of your child exceed your own needs, even at the expense of your own needs, right? And the beloved in terms of the other person in the relationship. However, the more intense version of this, which they call ishq, which is a degree higher, and you may have seen this in the previous talk, right? With the US speaker, did he talk about ishq? Yeah, and Rumi? No? This must only be reserved to a relationship with God. So if we were to repeat this, spiritual love, we'd say spiritual love is of two types, the human-human and the human-divine. But in both instances, it's a love in which the lover seeks to gratify the beloved in such a way that leaves no will or requirement sought from the lover other than the gratification of the beloved. Yani you seek things for the sake of Allah. You worship God for the sake of Allah, right? You do everything for the sake of your beloved. So yes.
So like you said, that you say divine, like when you look at them, it's like you see the divine.
Ah, okay, yes. So
is that the difference? Like, because like you know how you said there's also abusive relationships. So it's like
Yeah.
you're not meeting your needs or whatever. But it's like, is it different because with this one you're seeing like divine, like significance in that person? Like in a
Okay.
sense where, like,
Yeah, it's a number of things. I'm glad you brought that up, because when the question is actually before that, how do you achieve spiritual love? How do you get to that level? Because if you're on the process of suluk towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you've purified your heart, you've activated a capacity of the heart to perceive a deep intrinsic beauty in things that you can't really see at the lower levels. You can't perceive at the lower levels, right? So your beloved, let's say it's another human being. Your beloved is not loved for just their outward form. In fact, they may not even be that attractive outwardly. Imam al-Ghazali says in Kitab al-Mahabba, in the Ihya, he says, the greater kind of love, the spiritual one, attaches itself to batini qualities and not external qualities. Right? See, someone may be outwardly very average, but they have such a beautiful soul and character and virtue that shines outward with such a luminosity that it becomes a powerful source of attraction to the other person. This is because it's not the body in falling in love with the body, it's just the ruh or the soul, right, attracted to another soul. That's where the expression comes, kindred souls, comes from, right? But of course, in a lot of Hollywood context, it's very crass and very soulmate. That the original meaning of these terms in the ancient traditions meant something completely different. It means what I'm talking about here is that there's such a kinship of souls that you accomplish what Ibn Hazm, Al-Andalusi, he wrote a very, very beautiful book called Tawq al-Hamama. Have you read it? Oh, you have to read it. We read it once in Al-Andalus. I did tours of Al-Andalus. We read it in context. It's a very beautiful text where he says, relying on ancient sources, he draws up a story right? He didn't come up with it, but he provides lavish details from his own account. In the beginning, now, okay, I have to mention a few conditions here, because don't take it in the wrong way, especially in light of what's happening today with gender questions, right? This is an ancient story that has nothing to do with this nonsense that's happening today. But basically, the original human being before created in this world were a male-female unity. And they were sliced in half and set into the world. This is Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, one of the most rigorous fiqhi minds of Islam. Zahiri, he's a Zahiri, you know. Ibn Hanbalis can't reach up to his level of literalism. So listen to what I'm saying. This is Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi. Because another thing I want to mention before I get into Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, the Hanbali tradition in Islam has one of the richest literature on love. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, Ibn Taymiyyah. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I don't want you to think that what I'm talking about is airy-fairy fringe stuff. Right? Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah were Sufis anyway, but even in their very rigorous type of sober, you know, type of Islam, they wrote extensively about love. And Ibn Qayyim is, more than any other Muslim writer, points out where love can go wrong and what types of love you can't have for another human being. He says, be wary, watch out. This is only reserved for the ultimate beloved, right? So where was I? Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, right? He has a wonderful book called Tawq al-Hamama, the ring, you know the rings around the neck of the dove, the ringtails of the dove? Have you ever seen a dove? They have these kind of rings around their neck. Tawq al-Hamama, right? That's what love is, right? It's if you've ever been in the grip of love. Yeah. All right, so he says this, and he says, on earth, souls that were split are in search for one another. Now, it's an interesting story. I mean, you know, right? That when you find your beloved, ultimately you found your other half. That's why I say, you know, in a proper, especially this is for the newlyweds, when you introduce yourself to other people, you say, my better half. Right? This is where it comes from. Everyday language, we use it in a very kind of loose way, but that's where it comes from. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi. Yes, yeah. So he talks about, but it was in regards to your question. How do we get there? Yes. So purification of the heart through tazkiyah, what it does is it polishes our heart, it opens up our inner eye, and it enables us to see beyond the mere physical beauty into the intrinsic beauty of things. And the more I'm capable of seeing the intrinsic beauty of things, the more I'm able to see and penetrate deeper and deeper, up to a point where I see the divine beauty radiating in everything, right? And that you accomplish, if you accomplish that, you're at the level of spiritual love. Because now you are seeing in the beauty of your partner, or your beloved, or someone else, you're seeing in their beauty, or in the beauty of creation, not merely the beauty of the physical thing, but you're seeing literally, you're bathing in the divine names by seeing the beauty of the Asma' Allah al-Husna radiating through them. Right? You're seeing the Inna Allah Jamilun yuhibbul Jamal. God is beautiful and He loves beauty. You're seeing that divine beauty in all things. Because ultimately everything is upon divine beauty. Now there's a whole metaphysics about this that I'm not going to get into. You know, some scholars have written entire texts on the metaphysics of beauty, of creation. And they talk about Jamal al-Mutlaq wa Jamal al-Muqayyad, and wow, right? The whole aesthetics around it. If you're interested, I have a recorded course that I've done at the Cambridge Muslim College on aesthetics. And we teach comparative aesthetics also at Usul Academy. So it's a vast field, a very interesting one. But spiritual love, the vector is what then? What's the object of love in spiritual love? What's the object of love here? In both the human spiritual love and the human divine, what's the object? Ultimately, yeah, it's Allah. Right? The object is the ultimate beauty, which is beauty of Allah that's radiating through it. Which is why the vector is always an uplifting one, right? And sorry, not the vector, the movement, the movement. And the vector of love is what? What's the vector of love?
Towards the other.
Focused on your. Focused on your.
Yeah, outward, but not outward just towards another, outward, upward, yeah. And that kind of outward movement, I'm going to talk about tomorrow what that means, because there are different types of vectoral movements. There are different ways of you moving out of yourself, right? And imagine that your self's capacity becomes a capacity to encompass the entirety of the world, right? Well, we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. So the process of love, what does it produce here? In the presence of the beloved with a capital B, which is the ultimate beauty.
Closeness to Allah.
Sorry?
Closeness to Allah.
Yeah, so that union, not union in terms of you become unified with God, no, but that union of the lover and the beloved produces a qurb, a hudur, and all sorts of spiritual fruits and ecstasies and joys, the likes of which no one has ever experienced in existence, right? Just ask the lovers about their love, and they'll go silent because it's very difficult to articulate in words. They try to put it in poetry, and we have that poetry with us, We're going to read a few things from Rumi maybe if we have time, right? But it's very difficult to put in words because it is beyond words. The moment you put this, even when you try to put human love in words, it fails, right? Why? Because human love is an instance of, it's not a material, physical thing you can describe. But the lover of the beloved with a capital B is almost impossible to put into words. Right? You can allude to it, you can indirectly kind of produce images about it. It's very difficult because the closest, you can't. That's why the scholars use the language of intoxication. Right? Now, of course, they don't mean alcoholic intoxication, but if you're ever physically intoxicated by alcohol, right, the state it induces. Why do people escape into alcoholism? Why are they drawn to it? That's an interesting thing. If you ever looked into AA meetings and whatnot, which I have, like different types of addictions, right? It's interesting why, the hidden subtle reasons why they seek it. They don't of course seek the substance itself, right? There's something else that they're pursuing, but that's another issue. Right, so spiritual love, which we're describing here as ultimately the capacity to see the divine beauty shining through all things. That's why here, and this is where I want to discuss with you something that's very important that I think some of you might find difficult to understand with a 21st century sensibility. But it is important to get out of our 21st century mindset because it's not the normative frame. In a lot of classical Arabic literature, you find poets describing the beauty of a woman or a man as an instance for a spiritual rapture or enraptured experience. And you think, hang on a minute. Now, I've come across a lot of ridiculous Western writers who say, look, Islam is full of homosexual literature because someone's describing the beloved, so the beauty of another human being, right? If it's a male or male or female, etc. No, there's nothing about that. The problem is they don't understand this nature of the literature. Because in the same way that looking upon nature in a moment of clarity, a moment of intense purity of the heart, you have a vision in which the divine beauty shines forth. Likewise, in the beauty of another human being, it may happen. And it's more likely to happen in a human being because of all the reasons we mentioned. Because human beings are the most adequate locus or vehicle for the manifestation of all aspects of beauty. That's why when you read something like the Burda, the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ shines forth, right? The ultimate beauty of the Prophet ﷺ, the most beautiful human being, both in physical form and in spiritual form, right? So that's why we contemplate the characters of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was a Quran yamshi al-ard. His beauty was makarim al-akhlaq, perfection, right? But also, it's also why we're drawn to the beauty of awliya, the beauty of and the taqwa of scholars and people, uncles, aunties, etc. Right? There's a quality that radiates through them that while they are the vehicle that carries this, it doesn't necessarily originate with them. Right? You become a site where it manifests because you've done everything you can to improve and adorn yourself with the virtues. But when you adorn yourself with the virtues, what happens? Beauty upon beauty upon beauty upon beauty. You're bound to become really, really beautiful. Right? Correct? So we said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the virtues. Right? So the more you adorn yourself with them, the more He loves you. So if you ask yourself, how do I earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love? That's how you earn it. Right? You adorn yourself with the beauties from His divine names that He has told us that He loves. Right? Through ibadah and worship and nawafil. There isn't a single thing you can adorn yourself with more than the nawafil. And when you do it, He loves you. And when He loves you, you know the rest of the hadith. Right? But it's on you to exert yourself in the path. And the more purified you become, the more you elevate your degree of love from the elemental to the natural, to the psychological, to the spiritual. Right? And now I haven't described the how, because we don't have time to describe the how. But basically the how of doing this is the whole process of tazkiyah. The whole path of suluk is the how. The whole path that the scholars tell us about how to perfect ourselves and purify ourselves, that's the how. Right? Okay, so someone had their hand up. Someone had a hand up at some point? Yeah? Do you want to say something?
Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. Yes?
Yeah, my question is actually similar to the question I asked in the first session. When you're talking about, like, for example, in your relationship with your spouse, you see like the divine attributes manifesting. Is it possible to give an example? Like, would this be an example, like, I don't know, your spouse does something and it irritates you, and then, like, I don't know, like, you see Allah's like testing your patience. But is that what you're talking about? Or is it like very different to that? I'm just trying
to. Okay, yes. I mean, in a relationship, when you see more and more of the virtues here that we saw, like patience, like rahmah, like forbearance, like hulm. These are qualities that adorn the soul. So hulm is when, in the face of the anger of your partner, you respond with a certain degree of magnanimity, or a certain degree of forbearance, or a certain degree of bending to it a little, in your understanding of maybe they have reasons why they're angry, for example, right? So that's how you can manifest that kind of beauty in a relationship with a partner. Patience. The Quran describes the relationship of the وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, right? مَوَدَّةً and rahmah, لِتَسْكُنُوا, and He created the zawj, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, right? So the mawadda, what's mawadda? It's from the divine name al-Wadud, the lover. So mawadda is a type of love. Rahmah is different from love. Rahmah is similar to love, but it's an extension of a certain degree of care and compassion. And what that automatically creates in the other is, what automatically that creates in a relationship is sakina or sukoon. Sukoon is when there's a peaceful repose in a relationship as a result of this. Right? So to put it in terms of relationship, when you adorn yourself with these virtues, you're creating a beautiful third thing the offspring of this, which is a beautiful relationship. And that's what makes a happy marriage. And you have to break it down into constituent parts. We're not doing that because this is not the session for it. But in the relationship is where all of these are most manifest, because in a relationship you have a certain degree of elemental lust, you have a certain degree of selfishness, fulfilling desires, right? Even emotional and physical. You have a certain degree of emotional and existential requirements and desires. Rarely do people's relationship these days get to the level of spiritual love between each other, let alone in a relationship to Allah. Right? And this is where I think the upward thrust of this is that we try to get there. That's the most difficult one. The leap from 4 to 3 is the most difficult. Because the leap requires all the training in suluk and tazkiyah to achieve that adornment of the soul, right? Most of us, like the scholars say, are stuck between 5 and 4. Hopefully no one's at 6, right? But a large number of society, before they get married, and especially in the West, are at level 6, or between 6 and 5, yeah?
Would you say that, like, not everyone is meant to be, to love on the spiritual level?
Sorry? What's the last one? Not made to what?
Like, not everyone is meant to love on the spiritual level. Like, would you say it's a requirement, or?
Look, it's not it's not it's not a requirement. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the fara'id, right? The nawafil are additional. But the additional love comes with nawafil, right? So it's not obligatory. You can get into Jannah, you can get into a certain degree of hana, of happiness, of joy, without the spiritual. But it's not your full capacity. Right? And if one is content with that. And there are all sorts of reasons why people don't get to the spiritual. Some of them have to do with stunted innate capacities, for whatever environmental or personal reasons. For some, it's just lack of willingness, all sorts of reasons. You don't have to get there. No, one doesn't have to get there. But like as Rabi al-Adawiyya said, if God has given me this full potential, then I want to actualize it, because I want the fullest happiness, and the fullest happiness is happiness I get in the relationship with the beloved, right? But no, it's not compulsory. If it were compulsory, then we're all doomed. It's like Plato's philosophy. Unless you can become a philosopher king, everyone else is doomed. What does a simpleton like me do? That's not very compassionate, is it? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Islam, rahmati wasi'at kulla shay, right? Even if you do just a bare minimum,
He's given you the capacity, but it's your choice.
He's given everyone the capacity for the bare minimum, right? But He's given you the choice to reach the peak. And the scholars say the complete fulfillment of the hadith of the hidden treasure, I was a hidden treasure and I desired and loved to be known, you don't actualize that. Not you. The person who doesn't achieve spiritual love does not actualize that, right? Does not help in actualizing the purpose of existence itself, because you can't attain to the highest love of God nor knowledge of God. And so it then falls upon the shoulder of those few awliya who are the only ones actually fulfilling the purpose of creation itself. And the rest of us are either cosmic fodder or somewhere in between, right?
Have you heard of the hadith? I'm reading a book by Hazali, and he mentions a hadith where he says that most of the people in heaven are fools. Most of the people in heaven are fools because they I can't remember it word for word, but
are fools?
Yeah, because you're saying they kind of they're not at that spiritual level of love for God.
No, I mean, entry into heaven has hell has nothing to do with that. There are a lot of people in heaven who have not fulfilled the highest love, right? But where it's interesting is, even in heaven, right? Let's say you enter heaven. Do you want to enter into its lowest levels, or do you want to enter into those higher levels where you're perpetually gazing upon the divine face? I mean, how long do you want to live like that? Just so that's another. Now, scholars say even in heaven you're able to rise in rank, right? But that's another issue. I don't want to comment on that. That's for other scholars. Yes.
A quick question. Just trying to understand the practical side of it. So then, in a relationship, you could have two different individuals at different levels.
Sorry, you can have.
In a relationship, you could have two different individuals. Let's say, like in a marriage.
Potentially, you can.
Mental and spiritual.
You can.
And does that just balance? Like, is it?
It could create some problems. It does create problems, especially if one is at the lowest level and one is at the highest level. Then
should we just like find a person that
that's why when you get married, choosing a partner is important. But ultimately you can't control their trajectory. I've seen people in the same relationship go at very different levels, right? They're on different, yeah.
You could start at the same level.
Ideally, if you're on the same journey, let's say you and your partner are climbing Everest, right? You're climbing a mountain. Now, what kind of partner are you going to be to say, you know what, you're a bit too slow. I'll meet you at the summit in about 2 days, right? And on the way back, you see this skeleton on the way down. Like, so ideally, you're supposed to be lifting each other up, but it doesn't always happen that way, you know. And the history is full of these stories, or people who, or even someone who loves the other person more than they love them, right? Anyway, okay, thank you. So these, now I'm not entirely satisfied with the way I address the spiritual love, because there is one higher, ishq, which I haven't addressed, but you got the point I was making earlier, right? Okay, tayyib. Okay, we have 15 minutes. Let's open it to a discussion or questions or comments about the whole day. So tomorrow, inshallah, I'm going to move on to in a very, very different direction with this. I'm not going to continue with these kind of elements of love. What I want to talk about tomorrow is how different kinds of love can be a catalyst for self and social transformation. Right? Okay? Given the world that we're living in today, it's a very important question. Yes?
Good question. So, remember you were talking about today morning about, say, like a person who knows Allah's name and loves Allah's name, you know, he just can't think of anything else. And he's in that state. Is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? Just trying to figure it out. Forget about everything else.
No, it's a person who becomes who attains this state, which is the level of spiritual love, is at the level of what scholars call nafs al-mulhama, nafs al-mutma'inna. Right? So, it meaning that, you know how we often talk about nafs al-ammara, nafs al-lawama. There's actually nafs al-mulhama, then nafs al-mutma'inna, then a nafs al-radiyya, al-mardiyya, al-kamila. There's 7, right? So the person who's at the state of spiritual love is in the grip of a nafs al-mulhama on the way to nafs al-mutma'inna. Meaning, what does that mean? A nafs al-mulhama means the self or the level of the soul that is inspired. Okay, what does that mean? It means that you're at a state of intense love of Allah that you cease to notice anyone else. And you enter into a state where you're open to Allah, that you begin to hear direct inspiration in your heart from Allah. Right? Now, from a practical point of view, that's a very, very important stage and state to be in, but also the most dangerous. Have you ever played Snakes and Ladders? The game? There were commentaries on speech, and there were tafsir commentaries on Snakes and Ladders. It's not essentially a game. It's actually a spiritual game, where the ladders are the virtues that lead you up to the divine names, and the snakes are the vices that lead you down to hell. Right? On every Snakes and Ladders game, board game, there's a very long snake, where if you fall down there, you go all the way back to the beginning. That's the stage you're talking about. Why? Because in the state of this extreme form of ecstasy and love, where one feels that one is inspiring oneself, there is a tendency to assume that one has assumed the state of a nafs al-mutma'inna, but they haven't. What they've seen is the horizon of it, right? i.e., their soul and their state is not yet at the highest level, but it's within their reach. And because they're statically in love and they're hearing divine guidance, or they hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inspiring them, the biggest danger of the ego here is to assume that they're somehow special, selected. They don't need to do nawafil anymore. God's inspiring them. They can do this, they can do that. They tend to neglect sometimes their deen, because, hang on a minute, if I'm inspired, then I must be doing something right. God has spoken to me. God has given me this. God has given me this dream, this karama, this. And you fall into that trap of the snake, and you go all the way back down, right? And so many people have fallen here. The Sheikh Abdul Khaliq al-Shabrawi, this is a text that I'm going to be teaching soon, inshallah, called Degrees of the Soul, Maratib al-Nafs. He says this level is the most dangerous and the most difficult. Once you cross that threshold, you're safe. The problem is, because it's within reach, you begin to relax, become complicit, and it gets to your head. So yeah, I would say yes, it is a good state to be in, but it's also the supreme test, right? Ultimate test. It's when you thought you've slain the dragon, and then you start boasting, and then the dragon wakes up and puff of hot air and fire, you're burnt to a crisp, right? You see that in a lot of stories and novels and movies, although sometimes in movies they ruin it, right? But the slaying of your dragon is your nafs, your ego. You assume you've slayed it, you've won, you've prevailed over the dragon, only to realize, because you got too boastful. Why are you boastful? Because you've entered into the lair of Smaug, and there's a pile of gold everywhere, and all of a sudden you feel like you've been favored with all these treasures, right? When the treasures are actually a test. All those treasures are just a test. Right? And you're looking for the Arkenstone. You want to restore your kingdom, right? You get the reference, or are you too young or too old for that? Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you're after the Arkenstone because you want to restore your kingdom. I mean, what happens to, Thorin? Tolkien was a genius, when he wrote these books, right? That's the ultimate test. How did he pass the test? He gave it up all and he died, didn't he? I mean, ultimately he was killed, right? So Okay, let's come back to this reality. But that's a good analogy because that's where it comes from, right? You go into the lair, i.e., you go into this space where you are given these treasures. They get to your head, and you lose sight of the fact that you're on a mission to kill the dragon. You lose sight of the whole mission. The whole point of recruiting that hobbit was to come. Sorry. Anyway, you get the point, right? Okay, all right, good. Tell you. Yes.
Are there examples of people that have achieved that level?
Sorry?
Are there examples of individuals who've got beyond that?
Oh, yeah, they're everywhere. Yep, I mean, many of our awliya and great atqiya who are on the path of suluk. Yeah, there's a famous story of Shihab ad-Din Yahya as-Suhrawardi, who's a great, well-known Sufi. He enters into the city of Aleppo, and his clothes are patched up. That's how poor he is. And he's in the marketplace, and he's buying something. And as he's buying something, he takes out a piece of cloth to get a few coins, and in it there's a ruby this big. So a young boy sees it, and he runs to his king, and he says, "King, king, king! I've seen the biggest ruby in the world. It's with Fulan al-Fulan," right? And so he sends a messenger to Suhrawardi. This is a true story. Yeah, this happened a lot. He says to him, "My king seeks your company, your counsel." And he says, "Why?" He says, "Well, he wants that ruby, and he wants to give you a price for it, money. And the money is chests and chests of gold, such that he can build a palace." And right? So he takes it out, he crushes it to dust, and blows it to the wind. Right? The point of the story is, and that many of these stories have happened, until this day they happen. Right? I know many. The point of it is that these kind of people are in this world, but not of this world. This means nothing to them, right? This kind of wealth and these, and there are many people today. You know, a sheikh will give them. I've known a classic example of a sheikh who was given gold, cash, a palace. He gave it to the next beggar on the street, right? These things mean nothing to them, right? Or they give it to charity, or whatever it is. Right? The point is, these literally have no effect on them. And there are various other, many different types of stories and examples from the tradition of these kind of awliya. And subhanAllah, they give it away and it comes back to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps on giving them a rizq. And it's not, right? Because they know and they firmly believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala huwa razzaq, and they firmly believe in the Quranic verse, rizqukum fis sama'i wa ma tu'adun. Your rizq is in the heavens and everything you've been promised. Right? Yeah.
Would you say like those types of people have a deep love for Allah, like that we talked about?
Yeah.
Because like ultimately Allah's not gonna punish them. Like, if they accepted that, like it's fine. But it's like it's their love for Allah that like allows them to refuse.
Yes, and it's their love for Allah that allows them to not be attached to it. It literally means nothing to them. Right? There are many in history who have had wealth, and you realize when they die, there's literally nothing because they've already given it. Right? They get all this wealth, but they don't do it. They don't keep it for themselves. Right? Sorry?
Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Prophet's companion.
Hayb Ali.
Abu Bakr Siddiq.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, they gave all their wealth away, right? The Sahaba. I mean, who does that, right?
I feel like you can see glimpses of that spiritual love in like the people of Gaza, you know, that you see today that are kind of like, for example, they're not afraid to die or lose their home.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Even in, I mean, it's very common in what we call the common people. It's not something that only some mystic in a mountain somewhere, you know. No. I mean, the atqiya and awliya are everywhere. They could be poor people, they could be rich people. It's everywhere. And it's often humbling when you see people doing it and you realize, could I do it? You know, right? You think about it. It's, yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, and then Irfan. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a bit of a dumb question, but do you have any stories of like people who went astray, like crazy ones?
Stories of?
Like people who like gone astray. They saw the horizon, but
Oh, they went astray? I don't think a lot of people were interested in writing their stories. Yeah, there are many. I mean, you mean stories of Fulan went astray, Fulan? No, usually the stories are about. Actually, there are in Jiha and in Rumi. There are stories about people who've gone astray, but mostly the tradition usually documents the ones who didn't go astray. You know, to learn from that example, right? But the world today is filled with people who have gone wrong, right? You don't need stories about them, right? If you want to see a pure materialist person, you know, Wolf of Wall Street or whatever that movie is called, or whatever these movies, you know, everywhere. Go to the CBD in Sydney, take a walk in Martin Place. They're everywhere, you know. Look at the way they waltz around, and you can see it everywhere. It's literally, subhanAllah, it's like, it's pure egos walking the earth, right? Go to the CBD. Okay, all right, final question from Irfan. Okay, Irfan, and then, yep. And then we might have to leave it at that. I think we've gone beyond the time, yes.
So my question is, I hate to use this word correlation, but as you start moving up those, is there a correlation with like happiness, meaning, purpose? Yes, a good question. Sorry,
yeah.
That's the first question. And then tied to that is, what advice or what would you say to someone who is maybe chasing after that happiness, meaning, purpose? Because it feels like they're sort of focused on that, but maybe they're missing something important.
Every level here correlates with a different meaning, purpose, and degree of happiness. Yeah, and the physical one is associated with physical happiness and pleasure, right? That's like a high, comes and goes. And so the problem there is you have to constantly satisfy it, which you can't. So it's a never ending, right? It's a trap. And what's the meaning? There's no meaning, it's meaningless, right? And that's why, it has no form. The natural, psychological, they all have meaning, and some of these meanings associate with family, structure, peace, serenity, and the accompanying feelings of happiness associated with that. But the highest, of course, is the meaning that comes from knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you and you love Him. Right? That's the highest. So the advice often given is the most ultimate and most meaningful life is the one in which, while not being able to, even if you're not able to achieve it, your horizon is defined by it. Your horizon, your goal, your life, your pursuit is defined by the highest pursuit, which is the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pursuing it produces a product or an outcome or a child or a third thing, regardless of whether you're actually able to attain it, because it's not attainable fully. But it nonetheless does produce fruits, joys, ecstasies, happiness, meaning, purpose, satisfaction that nothing else can substitute for. And once you have that right, once your kind of compass is properly directed, your vector is towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all your other vectoral directions become modified and corrected.
So if someone is just chasing that, is that okay?
Sorry?
If someone is just chasing that, like they're motivated by that, like just that love, that brings satisfaction, existential happiness. If that's what they're chasing, that's what they're most motivated by.
No, that's great. Yeah. See, the thing is about motivation in Islam is We do things for the highest reason, and the highest reason is for the sake of Allah and His rida, His love. But it doesn't mean that you can't have other motivations as a subset to that, right? And this is where here the science of muraqabah and the science of niyyah comes in, right? So you can have all sorts of reasons why you're building up your family, right? As long as the supreme reason is the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the secondary one, or the third one, or the fourth one, like maybe certain material comfort or a certain degree of whatever it is, these are okay. The problem is not that, the problem isn't with these motivations. The problem is if that's all there is to your motivations, right? So once you have your direction set on the ultimate horizon and meaning, all other possible motivations are okay, if they're part of that broader direction. But if your only compass and direction and horizon is the lower ones, then you're trying to fill that void, that black hole with everything, including the kitchen sink, right? And it won't fit. You know, a black hole, what does a black hole do? Right? You can't fill it. So only God can sit at that center. All right, final.
My question was, you know, a dervish, when they're twirling, are they experiencing divine love at that time?
They're in a state of rapture. They're in a state of ecstasy where that, yes, it's largely an intense form of love. Because, you know, for the whirling dervishes, they're mimicking the movement of the heavens, right, with that movement. Yeah. And the heavens move according to, for love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything does, right? So by mimicking that movement, that rhythm, they're producing the kind of physical movements and conditions that induce and activate and intensify that love that they already have, but intensifies in that moment. Yeah. And they get into a state of ecstasy. And of course, the ones who do it in a proper way. And there's a lot of tourism today. You go to Turkey and you have restaurants and they whirling dervishes. I mean, I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't think they're flying high above the heavens, and maybe they are, I don't know, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the, yeah. Okay, yeah.
In that moment, it's just like they're elsewhere.
Yeah. Because it's based on Rumi, right? So if you read Rumi, yeah, we don't have time, but yani I can share a passage after in the break, inshallah, or tomorrow maybe. Maybe tomorrow we'll start with a passage. Okay, all right. Inshallah we'll do that. Bismillah ta'ala. Okay, all right. Thank you for listening, inshallah, and we'll continue tomorrow. Bismillah ta'ala. Any announcements you want to make?
Yeah. Just for the rest of the day, for the night, we'll aim to pray Asr around 6 p.m. So you guys have 20 minutes to just get some rest. We'll pray Asr and then we'll have dinner shortly after. After that, we'll have, I think, one final session for the night. We want to try something different, and potentially we'll be outside with a campfire. We'll have a Q&A panel.